Chosen one, pause for a moment and really listen. What you are stepping into right now is not a season of comfort. It is not a phase of applause, approval, or easy wins. This is the phase most people never survive, not because they are weak, but because they were never built for what you were selected to carry. If your life has suddenly felt heavier, quieter, and more intense all at once, this is not coincidence. You are not falling behind. You are being pulled forward into a level that exposes everything in you that cannot go with you. Most people would run from this moment. You stayed. This is the phase where isolation increases, clarity sharpens, and distractions lose their power. The phase where old versions of you start dying, even when they once kept you safe. The phase where God stops explaining himself and starts revealing who you really are. And yes, it feels uncomfortable. It feels lonely. Sometimes it feels unfair. But hear this clearly. If you were not chosen, this phase would never find you. The reason this stage feels so intense is because it is a spiritual filter. It separates those who only admire purpose from those who are willing to become it. Many start the journey. Very few survive this stretch. That is why so few ever walk in true authority. Scripture shows this pattern again and again. Joseph survived the pit, but prison is where most people break. David defeated Goliath, but years of hiding is where most would quit. Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness before power was released. Not everyone survives the wilderness, even when it is divinely assigned. If you are here right now, it means you already survived what was meant to destroy you. And now you are entering what will define you. This phase strips comfort so character can rise. It removes noise so discernment can sharpen. It cuts off emotional dependence so spiritual authority can develop. Chosen one, if this message resonates with you, take a second right now to support the channel. Tap like, subscribe if you haven't already. And if this word is speaking directly to your spirit, consider using super thanks to support this work. It helps keep messages like this reaching the ones who need them most. Now listen closely. This is not a punishment phase. This is a preparation phase. But preparation always feels like pressure before it feels like power. You may notice people misunderstanding you more than ever. That is normal. When God elevates you internally, your external environment reacts. Familiar connections may fall away. Old conversations may feel empty. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming focused. This is the moment where many self-sabotage because the silence becomes louder than the applause they used to receive. Some go back to old habits. Some chase validation. Some shrink themselves to fit spaces they've already outgrown. You didn't. That's why you're still here. This phase is survival, not of the body, but of the identity. Only those willing to let the false self die can step into the true calling. And make no mistake, the pressure you feel is not here to crush you. It is here to reveal you. Chosen one, you are not late. You are not lost. You are right on time, standing at the edge of a phase most people never survive, but the chosen were built for. And this is only the beginning. Chosen one, this is where many start questioning themselves, not because they are weak, but because this phase exposes parts of you that comfort could hide, but purpose never will. The reason this season feels so brutal is because it is designed to break dependency, not destroy destiny. God is not attacking you. He is removing every false support you leaned on when you could not yet carry the weight of your calling. Think about this carefully. Earlier seasons allowed distractions. Earlier seasons allowed emotional crutches. Earlier seasons allowed compromise to feel harmless. But this phase does not tolerate any of that. Everything unnecessary starts to feel heavy. Everything misaligned begins to irritate your spirit. What once satisfied you now leaves you empty. That is not confusion. That is refinement. Scripture reveals this pattern clearly. When God wanted to elevate Gideon, he reduced his army. When he prepared Elijah, he sent him into isolation by the brook. When he called Moses into leadership, he sent him into the wilderness for 40 years before using him publicly. Why? Because influence without inner authority collapses under pressure. And God will not release you into a realm you are not internally built to survive. This phase hurts because it is a tearing away of false identity. The version of you that needed approval cannot survive where you are going. The version of you that relied on validation cannot lead in authority. The version of you that avoided confrontation cannot walk in truth. So pressure comes. Pressure reveals motives. Pressure reveals wounds. Pressure reveals fear that has been hiding under success, busyness, or routine. You may notice old insecurities resurfacing, not because you are regressing, but because they are being exposed for healing. God does not ignore what will later sabotage you. He brings it to the surface while you are still teachable. This is why this phase feels emotionally exhausting. You are not just moving forward. You are shedding layers. Even Jesus experienced this. Before his public ministry began, he was led into the wilderness to be tested. Hunger, isolation, and temptation came before miracles and authority. The enemy attacked identity first. If you are the Son of God, because identity is always tested before power is released. Chosen one, if you are feeling tested at the core, it is because something powerful is close. Another reason this phase feels unbearable is because God is teaching you to hear Him without external confirmation. When applause disappears and familiar voices go quiet, you are forced to rely on discernment instead of consensus. This is where many fail. They look for reassurance in people who can no longer recognize them. They look for old signs in a new season. They ask for permission when God already gave instruction. But you are learning something different. You are learning to move without needing everyone to understand. You are learning to trust what God whispered, even when the environment screams doubt. That is spiritual maturity. This phase also reveals who cannot go with you. Some connections fade not because of conflict, but because of alignment. They were meant for who you were, not who you are becoming. Let that happen. Survival in this phase is not about strength, it is about surrender. Surrendering the need to control outcomes, surrendering the need to explain yourself, surrendering the urge to rush what God is slowly building. Chosen one, this phase feels brutal because it is sacred. It is where you stop surviving off emotional fuel and start operating on spiritual authority. Most people turn back here. You didn't, and that is why what comes next will change everything. Chosen one of the clearest signs you have entered this phase is isolation. Not the kind that comes from rejection, but the kind that comes from separation. This is where many misunderstand what God is doing and assume something is wrong, when in reality, something is finally being aligned. Isolation is not abandonment, it is assignment. In this phase, conversations feel shallow. Social spaces feel draining. Even people you once felt close to no longer speak the same language as you. You try to explain what you're sensing, what you're becoming, and the words fall flat. Not because you are unclear, but because they are not meant to hear it. Scripture shows this again and again. Before God used Abraham to birth a nation, He called him away from his father's house. Before Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal, he lived hidden by the brook. Before Paul stepped into global influence, he spent years in obscurity. Before Jesus selected the 12, he withdrew to pray alone. Isolation always comes before assignment. This is where God removes noise so your discernment can sharpen. When too many voices are around you, you mistake opinions for guidance. When silence surrounds you, you learn to recognize the difference between your thoughts and God's direction. But this is also where many people panic. They mistake isolation for loss and rush back to familiar spaces that no longer fit. They force connections that God is allowing to dissolve. They downgrade their calling just to feel included again. Chosen one, resist that urge. You were not created to be understood by everyone. You were created to be effective in your assignment. And effectiveness requires clarity. Clarity requires quiet. This isolation is teaching you how to stand without leaning, how to hear without confirmation, how to obey without applause. These are not small lessons. These are leadership foundations. In this phase, God is also exposing emotional dependencies. Some relationships were never about connection. They were about comfort. When God begins removing them, it feels like loss, but it is actually deliverance. Even Jesus experienced this. There were moments when crowds followed him, but there were also moments when he stood alone. In Gethsemane, His closest disciples slept while he carried the weight of what was coming. That moment of isolation preceded the greatest act of obedience in history. Chosen one, if you feel like no one truly sees the weight you're carrying right now, you are in good company. Isolation also refines your motives. When no one is watching, when no one is praising, when no one is affirming you, why do you keep going? This phase answers that question. God is ensuring that when elevation comes, it doesn't corrupt you. When influence increases, humility remains. When doors open, your identity stays rooted. Another truth many avoid is this: some people cannot survive your next level, not because they are bad, but because they are comfortable where they are. Your growth becomes uncomfortable for those who chose stagnation. Let them stay. You are not responsible for carrying people who refuse to move. Even Jesus let the rich young ruler walk away. Isolation is not forever, but it is necessary. It is the training ground for spiritual authority. It is where your voice becomes clear, your convictions deepen, and your obedience strengthens. Chosen one, this separation is protecting you from dilution. You are being preserved for impact, not popularity. Most people escape this phase by numbing themselves with noise, relationships, or distractions. You are surviving it by becoming still, and that is why you are being prepared for what most will never touch. Chosen one, this phase always brings one unavoidable confrontation: identity. Not the version you present to others, but the one you believe when no one is watching. This is where many collapse, when titles fade, routines break, and familiar roles fall away. You are forced to answer a difficult question. Who are you when what you do no longer defines you? This phase strips labels. You may notice that accomplishments no longer satisfy you. Recognition feels empty. Even spiritual activity can start to feel dry. Not because you lost faith, but because God is shifting you from performance to identity. Scripture makes this clear. Before Jesus performed a single miracle, heaven opened and declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That declaration came before ministry, before sacrifice, before public validation. Identity was established first. Then immediately after, Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tested. The enemy did not attack his power. He attacked his identity. If you are the Son of God, every temptation questioned who he was, not what he could do. Chosen one, the same pattern applies to you. This phase challenges everything you thought made you valuable. You are learning that your worth is not in productivity, usefulness, or approval. It is in being chosen, period. That realization is uncomfortable for people who learn to survive by being needed. In this phase, God is dismantling false identities you built to cope. The strong one, the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who never asks for help. These identities once protected you, but they cannot sustain you where you're going, so they start to crack. You may feel emotionally exposed. Vulnerabilities you thought were buried resurface. Old wounds ask for attention, not to weaken you, but to heal you properly. David went through this, anointed as king, yet forced to live like a fugitive. His identity was tested daily. Was he a king without a throne, or just a shepherd with a promise? That tension shaped his heart. Joseph lived it too. A dreamer with visions of leadership, yet sold, imprisoned, and forgotten. His identity could not depend on circumstances, or he would have broken. Chosen one, this is where God ensures your confidence is anchored in him, not outcomes. Another reason this phase feels intense is because God is asking you to let go of how you see yourself, not to erase you, but to reveal you. The truest version of you often emerges when the false versions are stripped away. This is why affirmation feels scarce right now. God does not want your identity propped up by external voices. He wants it rooted internally. If people stopped clapping tomorrow, would you still obey? If the platform disappeared, would you still believe? If the process lasted longer than expected, would you still trust? These are not punishments. These are tests of alignment. Most people avoid this phase by rebuilding their identity on something else: a relationship, a role, a distraction. But you are being taught to stand unshaken. Chosen one, once your identity is settled, nothing can manipulate you. Praise won't inflate you. Criticism won't break you. Delay won't discourage you. This is the phase where insecurity dies and authority begins, and only those willing to lose who they thought they were can survive who they were always meant to become. Chosen one, this phase is not only about what is being revealed, it is also about what is being removed, quietly, strategically, intentionally. This is the pruning stage. Pruning does not look like progress, it feels like loss. Things slow down, opportunities pause, certain doors close without explanation. You start wondering why what once worked no longer produces results. But pruning is never punishment, it is protection. Jesus said in John 15 that every branch that bears fruit is pruned so it can bear more fruit. Notice that. Fruitful branches are pruned, not cut off. This means growth alone does not exempt you from trimming. In fact, growth invites it. Chosen one, if you are experiencing reduction after obedience, this is not failure, this is refinement. God is cutting away habits that drain you, connections that dilute you, and patterns that limit future capacity. Even good things can be removed if they are no longer aligned with what is coming. That is why this phase feels confusing. You expected momentum but got resistance. You expected expansion but got restriction. You expected affirmation but got silence. This is where many misinterpret God's silence as disapproval and rush to fill the gap with noise. They force movement instead of allowing alignment. They cling to what God is gently removing. Do not do that. Pruning is delicate work. God removes only what will later interfere with fruitfulness. He sees branches you cannot see, future weight you cannot yet feel, pressure you have not yet faced. Some of what is being removed are old coping mechanisms, the habits you used to survive trauma, the patterns you used to avoid feeling pain. They helped you once, but they will hurt you later. God is not stripping you, He is strengthening you. Even relationships can be pruned. Some people were meant to support you in one season, not all seasons. Their role has been fulfilled. Letting go does not dishonor what was. It honors what is coming. Abraham had to let go of Lot before elevation came. Elijah had to leave Elisha before the mantle could fall. Jesus let many walk away when his teaching became too heavy. Pruning often looks lonely because it is selective. This is also where God limits your output. You may feel tired more easily. Your energy feels guarded. That is because God is teaching you sustainability. Burnout cannot survive where you are going. You are learning to move with intention instead of urgency. Another hidden part of pruning is motive purification. God is removing ambition that competes with obedience, desire that pressures timing, expectation that leads to disappointment. He is aligning your heart to move when He says move, not when you feel restless. Chosen one, pruning hurts because it cuts close to identity. It touches things you thought were part of you, but anything God removes was never meant to define you. This phase protects you from future collapse. Many rise fast and fall harder because they skipped pruning. They carried too much weight on weak structure. God refuses to do that with you. So He slows you down. He narrows your focus. He trims the excess, not to reduce you, but to prepare you for greater reach. Chosen one, when this phase is complete, you will not only be fruitful, you will be stable, and that is something most people never become. Chosen one, there is a kind of pressure that does not crush. It clarifies, and this phase is full of that pressure. What you are feeling right now is not random stress. It is the weight of responsibility forming before the release of authority. God does not hand authority to untested vessels. He forges it under pressure. This is where many misunderstand what is happening and label it as spiritual attack, when in reality it is spiritual preparation. Pressure exposes what is unstable. It reveals cracks in belief, impatience in faith, and fear in obedience. That is why this phase feels relentless. It is addressing what cannot go with you. Scripture confirms this process. Jesus learned obedience through what He suffered. Not because He was disobedient, but because obedience under pressure produces authority that obedience in comfort never could. David faced pressure long before he wore the crown. He ran from Saul, lived in caves, and led men who were broken and bitter. That pressure shaped his leadership. By the time the throne came, authority was already formed within him. Chosen one, this pressure is teaching you how to respond without reacting, how to stay aligned without needing to control outcomes, how to trust God when circumstances contradict the promise. You may notice your tolerance for nonsense shrinking, your patience for surface-level living decreasing, your desire for depth increasing. That is pressure doing its work. This is also where emotional discipline develops. God is teaching you how to feel without being ruled by feelings, how to acknowledge fear without letting it lead, how to experience doubt without surrendering truth. Authority is not loud, it is steady. Pressure trains you to carry weight without complaining, to hold vision without constant reassurance, to move forward even when progress is not visible. This is why many collapse here. They confuse pressure with opposition and assume they made a wrong turn. They pray for escape when God is asking for endurance. But you are learning something rare. You are learning how to remain grounded when things feel uncertain, how to stand firm without needing to see the full picture, how to trust God's character when His methods feel uncomfortable. Another reason this phase is intense is because God is testing your reactions, not your intentions. Anyone can have good intentions. Authority comes from controlled responses. How do you respond when misunderstood? How do you respond when delayed? How do you respond when provoked? These responses are being refined. Jesus stood silent before his accusers, not because he had no power, but because he had mastered it. Chosen one, silence under pressure is strength. This phase is also where discernment deepens. Pressure forces you to choose wisely. Who to listen to, when to speak, when to wait. Discernment grows in environments where mistakes carry weight. God trusts you with pressure because He trusts you with influence. And here is the truth many miss. Pressure does not mean you are close to breaking. It often means you are close to breakthrough. Not the loud kind, but the internal kind that changes how you carry yourself forever. Chosen one, once authority is formed, circumstances lose their power over you. You stop chasing signs and start moving with certainty. This phase is producing that certainty. Most people want power without pressure, influence without endurance, visibility without responsibility. You are being given something different. You are being formed to lead, not perform. And when this phase ends, you will not need to announce who you are. Authority will speak for you. Chosen one, there is a moment in every calling where quitting feels logical, not dramatic, not emotional, logical. This is that moment for many. And this is why so few ever make it past this phase. By now the excitement is gone. The clarity you once felt seems distant. The promise still exists, but the process has worn you down. This is where people do not storm out in anger. They slowly drift away in discouragement. Scripture warns about this. Many are called, but few are chosen. Not because God changed His mind, but because endurance determines access. This phase tests your ability to remain committed without emotional reinforcement. Early seasons come with passion. This season comes with discipline. Passion starts journeys. Discipline finishes them. Most people quit here because they misread silence as absence. When prayers feel unanswered and movement feels slow, they assume God has moved on. But Scripture reveals something else. God often goes quiet right before a shift, not because He is distant, but because He is focused. Think about Job. When everything collapsed, heaven was not silent out of neglect. It was silent because something deeper was unfolding. Job's faith was being refined beyond reward-based obedience. Chosen one, this phase asks a dangerous question. Will you still obey if nothing changes externally? Many say yes in theory. Few live it in reality. Another reason people quit here is exhaustion. This process demands internal strength, not just belief. If you rely on motivation, you will fail. Motivation fades. Discipline remains. This is where God teaches you how to rest without retreating, how to pause without quitting, how to slow down without giving up. Many do not learn this. They associate rest with weakness, so they burn out and walk away. You are learning something different. You are learning that obedience does not always look productive. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like being faithful in small, unseen moments. Sometimes it looks like saying no when you want to say yes. Another reason people quit is because comparison becomes louder here. They look sideways and see others moving faster. gaining attention, receiving validation. They forget that calling is not a race. It is an assignment. Peter asked Jesus what John's future would be. Jesus responded, "What is that to you? Follow me." Comparison always distracts from obedience. Chosen one, if you start measuring your progress against others, you will abandon your own path. This phase also exposes misplaced expectations. Many believe calling guarantees ease. It does not. It guarantees purpose, and purpose requires sacrifice. Jesus never promised comfort. He promised life. Those who quit here often choose peace over purpose, comfort over calling, familiar over faithful. But those who survive this phase gain something irreversible. They gain inner certainty. They no longer need signs to keep going. They no longer need encouragement to stay obedient. They move from faith that needs reassurance to faith that rests in trust. This is why heaven watches closely here. Angels ministered to Jesus after the wilderness, not during it. Strength came after endurance was proven. Chosen one, if quitting feels tempting, that is not a sign you are failing. It is often a sign you are close. The enemy attacks hardest where endurance matters most. He does not need to stop you early if he can convince you to stop yourself now. Do not quit, not because it is easy, but because what comes next requires the strength only this phase can produce. Chosen one, this is where everything you survived begins to make sense. Not all at once, not loudly, and not in the way you imagined. What follows this phase is not a dramatic announcement. It is an emergence. Emergence is quiet. You do not wake up one day feeling completely different. You simply notice that what once shook you no longer controls you. What once confused you no longer distracts you. What once tempted you no longer owns you. That is how you know you survived. This is the phase where authority becomes natural. You are no longer trying to prove anything. You are no longer seeking permission. You move with calm certainty because your identity, endurance, and obedience have been tested and settled. Scripture shows this clearly. After the wilderness, Jesus did not announce his power. He walked in it. People recognized authority before he ever claimed it. Demons responded. Lives shifted. Atmospheres changed. That is what happens when preparation is complete. Joseph did not walk into Pharaoh's presence as a desperate dreamer. He walked in as a composed leader. Prison refined him. Delay matured him. When opportunity came, he was ready without rehearsal. Chosen one, this is why the phase you survived matters so much. Without it, emergence would have destroyed you. Visibility without stability ruins many. Influence without identity collapses under pressure. You were protected from that. Emergence does not mean life becomes easy. It means you become anchored. Storms may still come, but they no longer define your direction. You respond instead of react. You discern instead of rush. This is also the phase where impact increases, even if recognition does not. People feel your presence before they understand it. Your words carry weight. Your silence carries wisdom. You may notice others coming to you for clarity, not because you chased influence, but because authority attracts hunger. This is also where humility becomes natural. You know what it cost to get here. You know how easily it could have gone another way. So pride has no place to grow. Most people will never witness this part of you. They only knew the old version. They may not recognize the new one. That is fine. Jesus was not recognized by everyone after resurrection. Some saw him and still doubted. Emergence does not require universal recognition. It requires obedience. Chosen one, the phase you entered was never about survival alone. It was about formation, and formation leads to function. You are not emerging to compete. You are emerging to serve with authority, to lead with discernment, to stand firm without arrogance. This is where your life stops being about becoming and starts being about assignment. The cost was high because the calling is heavy. Few survive this process because few are willing to let go, endure pressure, embrace silence, and stay obedient without reassurance. You did, and because of that, you are stepping into a realm most will never access. Not because you're better, but because you were willing. Chosen one, do not rush this emergence. Let it unfold naturally. Walk humbly, stay aligned, remain teachable. What God releases next will not need to be announced. It will be evident, and those who are meant to recognize it will. You survived the phase most people never do. Now walk in what you were prepared for.